Gondwana Records podcast.
Gondwana Records podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Gondwana Records podcast. I'm Mari from Gondwana Records, and thank you so much for joining us. For the next 2 episodes, I'll be sitting down with Chip Wickham, who has just released his brand new album, The Eternal Now. Saxophonist, flautist, composer Chip Wickham has long been part of the Gondwana Records family. In fact, he played on Matthew Halsall's debut album Sending My Love, the label's very first release back in 2008. That is 17 years of musical friendship. Hi, Chip.
Morning, how are you?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Thanks for being here.
I'm very honoured to be here in the podcast.
Yes, I'm looking forward to hearing how you first met Matthew Halsall in this conversation. But let's start at the very beginning, your own musical journey. Can you share your childhood musical memory that stayed with you and shaped who you are today?
Yeah, well, it's quite a while ago now. I have to think back quite a long way. But yeah, I think my musical childhood was very nice, very simple. We just listened to a lot of music.
At home?
At home, yeah. Luckily, my mum and dad had pretty good taste in music. I've got an older brother and older sister, so I had a lot of nice, typical sort of family influence on you listening when you're young.
What were you listening? Radio, records?
Everything, really. I had a lot of cassette tapes.
Cassette tapes,
And vinyls and stuff like that. My dad had a lot of records and vinyls, and we had this wonderful Kai cassette tape with like teak wooden sides. And I remember being fascinated by it because we had these wonderful headphones that had a huge long curly cable. And I used to sit with playing the tapes, and it had a 5-band EQ on it, so you could mess with the frequencies a little bit. And on the headphones, you could turn one side off and the other. And so you could listen to different sides of the music, because a lot of the older music was done in mono or whatever, so things were one side or the other. So if you turn one headphone, you couldn't hear bits of the record. So it was almost like a strange kind of interest in the technology when I was little. And I remember sitting for hours listening to music. And luckily my mum and dad had lovely music. They were really, really interested in music. They weren't particularly musicians. There was a lot of interest. And my dad had a really good love of music as well. He collected a lot of good records. So it was all sort of waiting for me a little bit. And we used to listen to all sorts, Aretha Franklin and Jose Feliciano, and right the way through sort of Cat Stevens and all that's kind of music that was lying around. As well as some quite interesting things I didn't realise till later on, but I remember as a kid being quite scared of a record cover that he had in his collection, in his album. And I didn't realise, but later on I figured out that it was Johnny Harris's Movements album, which is probably one of the top 10 albums ever. I mean, it's just an amazing album. And I remember it because it was double exposure, and the second bit of exposure had his eye down here somewhere. I remember as a kid being quite scared of that. There's a weird sort of psychedelic picture with this guy with his double exposed face with his eye was lower down, and I vividly remember being quite scared of that album cover. Yeah. But I used to listen to it, and of course now, with hindsight, it's the most wonderful album and stuff that I still listen to now. And I sort of unpicked my dad's taste in music later on, because it wasn't like we sat down and talked about music, you know, it was just stuff was lying around.
Yeah.
But I had like Thelonious Monk records and Stan Getz and Jerry Mulligan records and Sonny Rollins and stuff like that, alongside sort of all sorts of things, you know, so it was all kind of waiting for me. It's only later on when I actually spoke to my dad about sort of music a little bit more, when he said to me, I brought him up to Ronnie Scott's to one of my shows, and after the show he went, oh yeah, you know, you do realise I've seen John Coltrane live, don't you? And of course my jaw dropped, because, you know, sometimes you don't have those conversations with your parents. They're you and you're them, and you just think you know them. And then he'd seen him at the Dome in Brighton, and my dad used to spend a lot of time in Soho in the 60s, and that's where he got his love of sort of the Ronnie Scott stuff and all those sort of records that he used to have lying around. And so I was quite lucky, really. My mum always encouraged me. She got my first instruments and stuff like that, so she was, later on there was that more of a kind of push from her in terms of backing me up in terms of my interests at the right age, you know.
So is
that your mom who got you a saxophone?
Yes, she got me
Yeah?
my first saxophone.
Do you
yes.
know why she chose saxophone for you?
No, I pestered her for one. For the life of me, I can never quite remember what it was. Well, there was no kind of eureka moment for me. I was listening to a lot of kind of blues music, sort of Sonny Boy Williams II, and I bought myself a blues harp, which was this sort of 10-hole sort of blues, not the chromatic ones that Stevie plays, but the little sort of blues ones. And I bought a book, and I'd learned how to play it in second position. So I was showing signs of wanting to play, and I wasn't really doing it at school. I wasn't like in the school orchestra. It was very much kind of like me loving music and wanting to get involved. I even bought myself a green Bullet, which is these wonderful microphones. There were remakes of the old mics, and they're like a bullet-shaped thing. They were green. They were magnetised to make them distorted, so when you played a harmonica, it just sounded really old and brilliant. But it didn't last long because I got quite frustrated with that as an instrument, and something that I can play on every music. And I don't remember why it was a saxophone. To this day, I don't know why. I mean, apart from it's big and shiny and sort of showy offy sort of instrument, isn't it? And maybe at that age I thought, well, this is a good way to be seen.
Yeah. And were you absorbed in playing, or did your mom have to support you to practice to get better?
No, not at all. I had a few lessons from various teachers to set me on my way, and it was all very sort of, innocent, and learning how to sight read a little bit and listening to different sorts of music. And of course, immediately as a saxophone player, you're thrown into the world of jazz, because it's the kind of home turf for the saxophone, So yeah, of course, leads into sort of a deeper learning of stuff. And I remember at the time there was a big Blue Note revival. There were reissue a lot of Blue Note records, and I remember the Virgin Records store in Brighton that just opened up. We had a mega store, which was quite a big thing at the time. It's quite silly now, but at the time there was this huge, great store on Western Road in Brighton, and I remember going in there and looking at all the vinyls and records and CDs, and they were giving away these Blue Note samplers at the desk. I bought something else, and when I was queuing up, they had these free cassettes, Blue Note cassette samplers, and I remember picking up one of those, and it was just like, wow, there was all sort of, Dexter Gordon and Horace Silver and all the sort of usual suspects, and Horace Pallan and all these sort of things. It became more important than everything else, do you know what I mean, bit by bit. There was no kind of, I was playing, I started to listen more, and then it all just grew quite organically out of that, really.
How old were you there?
I would have been about 15, 16. So that's when I really started to have an independent view of music and a kind of independent love of stuff, amongst other things. I mean, my taste has always been quite eclectic. I mean, I used to buy sort of Tom Waits records and David Bowie records and Blue Note records all at the same time. So I think I've always had that kind of healthy, broad attitude to music, and I've always listened to lots of different things. So, but of course, once you start playing more and more, it kind of takes you down a certain route, because you start to listen not just for music's sake, but for an intellectual pursuit. You're studying things or you're learning things. So you naturally, what you listen to becomes 2/3 that and 1/3 everything else,
Yeah.
So.
Is there any teacher that you have a big appreciation?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're learning anything, there's always somebody, isn't there, that kind of gets you going and gets you beyond that point of kind of that initial honeymoon where you do something new and you've got all the enthusiasm in the world. Then after a while, of course, you realise it takes longer and you get that kind of, And then that's where your teachers kick in. They give you that enthusiasm and they feed you things. I mean, I had lots of good teachers. When I was in Brighton, I had a guy called Pat Chapman who sold me my first saxophone as well. And he was very sweet. He certainly gave me the joy of it playing, and he certainly gave me lots of things to listen to. And when I went up to Manchester to go to uni at the age of 18, he connected with someone called Phil Chapman.
Same last name?
Same last name, but not related, which always confused me. And I went up to Manchester, this Phil, who's also from Brighton, which was great because I didn't know anybody in Manchester. And he just took me under his wing, I think, because we're both from the same place, and he could see that I was somebody that was desperate to learn. And I used to have to take 2 buses to his house. I lived in South Manchester, lived in North Manchester. So I used to go to him every week, and he was almost like a father to me at some points. I loved him dearly, he's no longer with us. And he would just give me records, go listen to this and come home, and would give me all the knowledge. I remember my first lesson with him was brilliant. I stood there and he goes, right, play me something. So I stood there and I was like, here we go, look at me, I'm so cool, and I sort of played something and he went very quiet, and I sort of, okay, and he played something. I thought, well, 18 years old, what do you think? Hey, this is great, isn't it? And he just went, right, okay, right, come over here. And he stood me in front of a mirror and he goes, right, don't do that with your hands, put your shoulders down, adjust your strap, stand up straight, and just made me sort of into it and said, right, now try playing something stood correctly and with your head up. And it was brilliant. He very sweetly pointed out that I had a long way to go.
Right.
And he was a fantastic teacher. I was with him for 2 or 3 years. And what I didn't realise is at first was that he was the main saxophone teacher at Leeds College of Music, which it still is one of the places to study jazz in the country. So it was just one of those moments in life of massive luck. He was this wonderful teacher. We were both in the same place, and I happened to know somebody he knew, so I arrived and I basically had the Leeds College of Music education through the back door. He just taught me everything I needed to know, which was as good education as you could get musically. I've had Mike Hall also in Manchester taught me for a while, and he was an amazing teacher. They definitely gave me the education I wouldn't have got otherwise,
Yeah.
And they gave me a good attitude, good work ethic, good love for the music, and just loads of kind of information that I think anybody that have lessons, I think a lot of lessons you can digest maybe sort of 20, 30% of it in the moment, and then you go away, and some things you're told you're still working at years later, and it was very much that. There's still stuff I do now that I pass on as well to people that ask me about technique. I find myself with Phil's voice in my head, passing that knowledge on, which is very sweet, and hopefully my voice is in somebody else's head, passing it on, and that sort of lineage is very sweet. It's very important that we respect where we've come from and the people that have helped us get there. It's a long journey, there's lots of time spent studying, and you've got to learn the right things in the right amounts, and you've got to learn how to work hard. For us musicians, we don't have a timetable or not clocking in and clocking out. We have to organise our own time and effort, which is a lifetime of battling yourself, learning your own habits and your own avoidance techniques, and so that you get enough work done during the day,
Was there a moment when you knew the music was your career path?
I did economics at university.
Okay.
So it always shocks people. Oh, right. And in my second year, I was already studying with Phil Chapman, who was just mentioned. And
so you didn't go to Manchester for music school. So you went to Manchester and study economics.
Yeah, because that was my academic life was very much that. I wasn't in the orchestra at school. My musical was very much a sideline and something. And because my parents weren't musicians, they were very enthusiastic, but it wasn't necessarily an obvious choice in my life in terms of career paths. And I didn't really know any musicians, or the ones I've met, were more teachers than actual sort of, players. And I'm quite cautious. And really what happened, as soon as I got to university, I had like 20 hours a week contact time. And I just used to do the essays quite quickly and then just go play jazz.
Yeah.
And so I used the time that I had in the 3 years I had pretty well, I think. And I got my degree at the end of it all. But in my second year, Phil Chapman was trying to get me to swap to Leeds, which is how I suddenly found out. He said to me, look, you should come to Leeds and swap your degree and go and do. But even at that point there, I didn't have the confidence to think I was going to be a musician, or it was I loved it and I was obsessed, but I didn't have the self-confidence or the kind of the backup or the kind of the structure in my life to see it as anything other than, we'll see how it goes. And obviously my mum and dad had got me to university and were paying for me to go to sort of do economics, and I was kind of very respectful of that. I thought, okay, well, let's just get this degree, and then it gives me a few more years. And so that was my kind of plan. So I turned the offer down at Leeds College in the second year, which is a bit of a sliding doors moment. But I actually think that I don't think I would have enjoyed music university, going to music, doing a degree in music, because I think I wouldn't have liked the competition and the kind of the kind of the competitive nature of music college. I think I was enjoying studying for the sake of studying and doing what I want to do. Because I think when you do a degree, you end up learning loads of things you don't need, and you're doing essays on subjects that you don't care about. Whereas I was just playing and studying me, and all the lessons I had were about me and technique and the interests that I had. So in a way, I kind of didn't need it. So I kind of got there in the end. Yeah, it wasn't really till after I left university that I started playing in bands, and then within about a year, I got my first sort of pro gig where I did lots of touring, and that was it. I was paying the rent with music, and I guess it was only until that point that, you know, I'm not somebody that has a massive career plan. I love what I love, and I was working very hard, but I didn't have any examples of people that did what I did and could show me, oh yeah, well, you need to do this, and that's an option, or you could maybe do that. Or it was very much kind of like I just sort of went out there and got on with it. And I worked after university, I worked in shops, just worked in retail just to pay my way, and was gigging at night and then it just happened. You know, I started playing in bands, doing lots of little jazz gigs around Fallowfield and Manchester with people like John Thorne and John Ellis and all these wonderful musicians that were all called John. No, they were wonderful musicians. So it kind of grew from that really quite organically, yeah.
Gondwana Records podcast.
You are now known as one of the leading saxophone and flute player in the UK's crossover jazz scene, and we've been talking about jazz. But first, you're very active, and your name was known in the breakbeat scene. How did you get into that scene, and who did you play with?
Manchester, really. I was just right place, right time. And again, there's that sort of eclectic nature of my listening. Kicked in a little bit. I've seen a lot of people miss opportunities in really good musical environments because it's maybe not what they think is going to be. But I've always joined in and jumped in. And at the time, I got a really good break in Ray and Christian through my bass player, Simon Sneaky. He got me the job in that band. Andy Ross, who's the Herbaliser sax and flute guy, was in Manchester, and a wonderful musician. Thankfully, he moved to London and left a gap. As is so, like any opportunities, any great moments in life and any career, sometimes just luck, and bless him, thanks Andy. He went down to London, and then Sneaky spoke to Mark Ray and Steve Christian, said, oh, Chip can do that. I've been doing little gigs with Sneaky for quite a while already. And yeah, he got me in. That was a whole scene, UK hip-hop and breakbeat and drum and bass and everything. I was working with people like Jimpster as well, who's now a very respected house DJ, but he was one of the leading edge of the kind of jazzy drum and bass sort of, you know, Ronnie Sais sort of era, you know. In Manchester, I was playing with him as well, and so we're using all samplers and effects and stuff like that. I remember we went to the Berlin Jazz Fest in 1997 playing live drum and bass, and it was a big deal in 97. But it was club music, same with the hip-hop scene at the time with the Ray and Christian, you know, and the Friends and Family Night in Manchester. And their Grand Central Records label as well that I was very part of. There was people like AIM and all these guys, and they were just making the best music. These were sort of working class lads with a sampler, do you know what I mean? It was all about club nights, and everybody would do little spots. Like Sneaky used to play double bass a lot in the clubs at the time over the DJs, stuff like that. And we all did that. We all just went and played with DJs and played this amazing explosion sort of black music, and our version of that, you know, I kind of cut on that, whether it was drum and bass or it was hip hop or funk or soul. It was just, it didn't really matter actually. It was lovely, and everybody that I got to work with were artists in their own right, and artists in inverted commas. Like, they were very much people with attitude. In the good sense, you know, they wanted to be something, they wanted to create something important, and like people like Andy Votel and Mark Ray. I mean, these guys are brilliant, they're absolutely brilliant people. You spend half an hour with them and you're exhausted. These are kind of wonderful brains and totally creative, totally inspiring, and I learned loads. A lot of my subsequent music has been inspired by these people and their attitude to music as well. Kind of be creative, create something new, go for it, don't worry, just, get on with it. If you can't do it, figure it out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was brilliant. Again, just another form of education that it's just, I was lucky enough. And I went on the road with Ray and Christian, and we went everywhere, Montreux Jazz Festival, and you name it. We went all around doing the big touring circuit and played with all sorts of American rappers. And it was just such an education, sitting tour bus, and we did tours for like the Far Side. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just like us, like a bunch of sort of, spotty white kids from Manchester all on tour with the Far Side. And we held our own, and they loved it, and it was, I don't think we kind of realised what we were doing at the time even, but it was like later on when I moved on out of Manchester, and people asked me what I'd done, and I'd mentioned these sort of things. People couldn't believe the people I'd worked with, but it's what we all did,
Yeah.
And anything was possible. It's a bit cheesy, but it was like that kind of, I'm going to do some tracks with them, and everybody had little projects, and records were coming out, and of course it was very easy to put records out, and of course Ray and Christian had their own Grand Central, which was all the kind of, so there was always something going on.
Yeah.
It just felt like it was easy. Do you know what I mean? Everybody, you were always being invited into, like, I played with AIM, and I played with all of them, because we all played with everyone's different bands, so it was happy days, it really was.
Great creative time.
Yeah, definitely creative. That was my big takeaway from the whole thing, was that kind of the creativity, and being around studios were fun places, and like someone like Mark Ray would just get samples from anywhere and just go, right, and he'd have tracks up in, in those days when you've got MPCs and stuff like that, and the technology was pretty slow. Do you know what I mean? You had to really want to do it, And then, but they all had a wonderful knowledge of music, and like this sort of encyclopedic knowledge of breaks and beats, and wonderful, like Andy Votel would just pull out these kind of, wow, have you heard that? And he'd come up to me talking about Harold McNair, for example. Now, I hadn't heard of Harold McNair one. And I was working with Andy Votel, and he comes and goes, and he started going, we were doing an album for Badly Drawn, and he starts talking about, I want a bit of Harold McNair in this. And I was like, oh, and he goes, and he looked at me like, you don't know who Harold McNair is? I'm like, flute player, from the Caribbean, but his career was in the UK, and he just played me The Hipster, a track by Harold McNair, and that was like, whoa, lights, bing, 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 like this. It was just unbelievable. So these are great people to be around. They can look at you, what you do, and just go, have you heard that? Or like stuff like David Axelrod and all these people that, Serge Gainsbourg, because he loves Serge Gainsbourg, that he said, he was like, so you've got to go listen to Melody Nelson, the album. And this is stuff I still listen to today. These are like my Desert Island discs, It was pretty important. I often think, God, if he, certain people hadn't sort of said, go listen to that, like, what I would be doing today, I don't know, Because you need that inspiration, I think, if you're going to become an artist in your own right. You need a plan, and you need to put all these big chunks together, and you need to really listen to the good stuff and not copy it, but take from it what the vibe or the attitude or the energy of whatever it is, and set your benchmark that high.
Gondwana Records podcast.
How did you meet Matthew Halsall? You played on his debut album, and we were just talking about people in the breakbeat scene. Yeah. But Matthew, was he there, or how did you meet him?
When I first met Matthew, it was probably towards the end of that sort of Ray and Christian sort of era, early 2000s. And Matt, we were just kindred spirits. We both liked the obvious sort of jazz stuff, and he was doing lots of kind of really nice sort of modally spiritual stuff, which was very much against the kind of grain at the time. But he was already doing sort of, dressing it up, mixing it with different effects and different styles, and very keen to sort of try stuff out. Do you know what I mean? And we immediately started playing together, and we were doing sort of gigs for quite a while before we did Sending My Love, which I think we actually recorded around, must be 2007, I think, 2008, but late 2006, 2007. And he did a bunch of recordings at the time in the same place in Salford Uni, all one-room recordings, There's some video footage of it, if you're knocking about, with all sort of screens, very sort of old-school jazz way of playing, a very elegant sort of Miles Davis approach to it all, very stylish, very kind of clear concept, as for somebody of his age at the time. He's younger than me, but he had a very clear concept of what he was doing, even if he would change it in the moment. His starting point was very clear. And so we played in some various little bands before it became for him. We did his own records, and Gondwana was even born, and we did lots of lovely gigs together. And I seem to be attracted to people that are kind of artistic people, and just loved it. Yeah, just loved playing together. And then I did some of the early sessions, and we ended up doing "Sending My Love," and then I promptly left the country. Missed all that. As he put that album out, it took off immediately. But I'd gone to Madrid at this point. I decided that my life was going to be in Madrid, for lots of reasons. But we were already pretty well formed as a friendship at that point. So even though I went to Madrid, every time he came to Madrid, I used to go and sit in on his gigs. And from there on in, I was in the Gondwana Orchestra, and we were always talking. Everything I did, any demo I had, I sent him to say, what do you think? And that wasn't because it was coming out in Gondwana or anything, it was just because he was a trusted pair of ears, and we were both had the same. I knew he loved what I loved, so it's always been there for what? Gosh, that's a long time ago, and I'm not going to count the years. But, yeah.
In Madrid, you released your music from Love Monk, and then now you're releasing your music from Gondwana Records. Was this a natural step for you to start releasing your music from Gondwana Records, given that the relationship with Matthew or all the communications? How do you think you're now on Gondwana Records?
It sounds quite obvious now. And, with hindsight being as strong as it is, but it wasn't at the time. I had some really interesting conversations because I was very happy at Love Monk, and I was very much like Gondwana. They're very creative. They love our work. They're into everything that's cool. They're into it, And they used to do lovely remixes for me, and Borja at Love Monk was a massive help in my career. We did a few singles together, and then he said, come on, let's do an album, and he pushed me quite hard. But at the time, for example, I sent those demos to Matt, because it was very much, I wanted to write an album for me. And as I was writing those songs, it was very spiritual, much like the stuff we'd been doing like 10 years earlier. So I sent it to Matt saying, look, and he knew I was talking, I'd already done a couple of singles with Love Monk, so there was no kind of discussion about Gondwana. I was like, what do you think? So even on that very first album, La Sombra, my first solo album, I was talking to Matt about that, and we went through the demos together like we do now. That relationship's always been there, but it's also, I think later on, as I got sort of past the third album with Love Monk, and my profile had grown sufficient, each album had grown better and better. There was this kind of like inevitability of the situation a little bit, and even to the point when I spoke to Bork and said, look, I've been chatting with Matt about going to Gondwana, he was like, yeah, that's a good move, you should have done it a while ago, sort of thing.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So I've been really lucky. The people I work with have always cared about me. And they've always been super encouraging and positive, which is what I need. I'm no tough guy, do you know what I mean? I need help. I need people around me that support me,
Yeah.
So I even had a conversation with him before I came on the label. We sat down and we, as friends, spoke, because he said to me, look, obviously before I sign you, one thing I want you to realise is that, I don't want to lose you as a friend if I sign you as an artist, which I thought was the most profound thing to say. That he said to me, look, we're at this point now where I really want to sign you, and you really want to be on the label. And we were like, on that level, it was fine. But also, the working relation has to be right where I would rather not sign you, keep you as a friend, than sign you and lose you as a friend as being on the art of the label. And that really touched me. And that was an important conversation, because our relationship changed when I joined the label. But in a good way, not in a bad way, but it changed because we often have conversations where he's my boss now. Or he doesn't act like my boss, but where the conversation is very much, it's different. But I knew what I was getting into, and I said to him straight away, yeah, no, I get that, and that's really sweet, and I'm the same, I would rather not join. But I think it was so inevitable. I've been doing all the Gondwana Orchestra at that point.
Right, okay.
And the sounds had kind of converged a little bit, and I think Matt just felt that he could make me into something bigger as well, which was really sweet. Again, just really sort of caring, genuine sort of approach, because I was already selling lots of records and doing absolutely fine with Love Monk, and had gigs and was doing stuff, I was already well formed. So for someone like Matthew, it's probably slightly less interesting than sort of newer artists, because he's very much a creative person that likes to take things and make things, where I was kind of an older artist who had a very clear production style and sound to my music after the 3 albums I'd done. So I think as that sort of friendship came through of like, yeah, we could do a lot more, come on, and that's how it developed from there, and it's grown from there.
before you told me when you are making music in Spain, that was really well received in UK.
Yes.
And then how did you feel after releasing your music from Gondwana Records, which is a UK label? Did you see impact of releasing music from a UK label?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a matter of scale as well, I think, because Gondwana are a much bigger label than Love Monk, which is no insult to anybody. You know, it is what it is. And I think it's timing as well. It's also, the UK scene has been just on such an up. It just made sense. I was around a lot more. And I think it was a very organic step and a good move at the right time. And I think, obviously, I'm getting different inputs into my production and my writing techniques at that point with Cloud 10. And we did the Lonnie Liston Smith 12 Festival, which I was really proud of. He immediately said, well, why didn't you do this Orange 12 as a little introduction to the label, which is their little series of classic spiritual jazz songs, And I'd already played with Dwight Tribble on his one, and Matthew had done one for Alice Coltrane, and Dwight had done Pharaoh, hadn't he, Sarah Saunders. And we sat down and we worked out, and we ended up with Lonnie Liston Smith, which was, again, Matthew's call. Because the album I'd done before that was very Rhodes and harp and very 70s sort of Lonnie Liston's like sort of Cosmic Echo sort of sound, And he said, well, that's a good sort of segue into the new label. And I didn't really do cover versions. For me, it was a bit like, I write my own music. I'm proud of writing my own thing, But again, he pushed me and said, do it. And it was really good. It's really hard work. Trying to rewrite a classic is just the most impossible task. But
3 songs you reimagining Lonnie Liston Smith's debut album, right?
It was Astral Travelling, Sais, and Peaceful Ones. Yeah, I'm so proud of them. It was such a difficult thing to do because they're already brilliant pieces of music, and it's just a thankless task of either copying or... And I tried to get something different. It was an unusual exercise for somebody like me. Beyond that, the fact that I didn't realise that myself and Lonnie Liston Smith have a friend in common. And suddenly I got a phone call from him. Somebody said, oh, he might ring. And I was like, like, what? Oh? And he rang me up.
Who's going to ring? Lonnie's going to ring.
Yeah, Lonnie's on the phone. Hi, yeah, hey, this is Lonnie Liston Smith. This kind of, and literally like that on the phone. And I was nearly in tears trying to talk to him. I was so overwhelmed emotionally. It was like, so happy and joy. It was like kind of, oh my God, your heroes are ringing you up. The first thing he said to me was like, yeah, I love your version of Astral Travelling. I was like, okay, that's good stuff. He said, yeah, but you missed a chord. And I was like, what? And he starts telling me off down the phone. And I could hear him playing the piano in the background. And and this beautiful voicing, this acoustic piano, he's just sort of playing, going, yeah, it's, you missed the 4 chord. It's a spiritual blues. And I hadn't realised that. I'd done it as very much more sort of Modeley sort of style, And he starts playing it in the background.
Wow.
And I'm like overwhelmed. I wish I was recording the message, I hadn't. And then he starts chatting and he was asking, why did you do it? And we started talking about music and life. And we just had this like about an hour-long conversation. So that was really lovely. That first record was, again, the first sort of, changing things a little bit to move to Gondwana and Matt having the input. And it led me somewhere brilliant. And the next thing I know, I'm talking to Lonnie Liston Smith on the phone. It's just like, life's brilliant sometimes, And I'm very proud that, especially there's a version of Sais, or in Egypt in brackets, which has done really good numbers. And that song especially, just sonically and the arrangement and the layers I put in and the way I changed it, super proud of that. And that almost feels like one of my own songs. I'm so proud of it. It's definitely his song, but I think I really gave a little bit of myself, a little bit of my soul went into that. And I played it the weekend at We Out Here. I did a little pop-up gig at the Braunswood stage, and we played some Lonnie Liston Smith, and played a bit of Yusuf Lateef, and we played Astral Travelling, of course. But we played that Sais as well, and it's still now when I play it, there's something about it special for me now. First album, Cloud 10, which again was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Because I then had to sort of produce, having come with all this sort of back catalogue and a bit of numbers already. And I knew I would sell records because I already was, but it was more the kind of like finding my place within the label. Because the label's got different sides to it, and I'm on the kind of Matthew spiritual, with Physonics, and certainly said Jasmine Myra and that kind of, and now the Ancient Infinity Orchestra and all that. So there was very much that growth in that side of the label at the time. I think I was brought in to sort of get going a little bit, because there'd been all the neoclassical side had been doing so well. So it was really interesting. But of course, it's one thing, oh great, and you're in, and then you have to make a good record.
So your album was Cloud 10.
Mm-hmm.
Then you did an EP called Love and Life.
Yes.
And those were recorded in the same session, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
In Madrid.
And then I think particularly Winter and the Slow Down, Look Around stands out. And both are very slow number. What is it that's special about these slow ballads that you write so beautifully, so well that people pay attention to your music?
That's a good question. I mean, I think for a long time I was either writing really massively big sort of hit singly and then these drop dead quiet beautiful ballads, and there seemed to be nothing in the middle. And I seemed to get in as kind of like writing the mid-tempo songs was a bit of an issue, because it seems to sort of my personality is really sort of big tunes or very reflective, deep music, Love that sound. And again, that's something that I learned early on working with Matthew, that kind of like the use of tempo and space, which is very much a Miles Davis thing, very much that lineage of like Kind of Blue and albums like that use emptiness and space to dramatic effect. And I do think like playing songs so slow they're almost difficult to play sometimes adds a beauty to it that is lost. I think people forget to play slow songs as slow as they can, because it creates a lot of space and it creates a lot of mystical energy and spiritualness with all those gaps and you can feel the musicians waiting for the next beat almost sometimes. You've got to have the right musicians to play like that. It's not actually very easy. It sounds very simple, but actually to get that kind of drama and that real suspense in there, and I think it is difficult. It's interesting. I think the most streamed song I've ever had is Winter. Which is the most simple of melodies. Sometimes when you write, the simple stuff is harder to write than the more complicated. And I think as young jazz musicians, as one of my only criticisms, sometimes they forget that they've got to connect with the melodies. It's like the melody is important. Even jazz music is very flippant about melodies, and I think sometimes you can overlook it's really hard to just play 4 notes and make them sound beautiful. It really is, because you've got less to play with. And I'm very proud of that ability to sort of connect people, and people always message me about those songs, and maybe it's the sadness in them or the reflection and the kind of that makes people react a little bit, and the soulfulness we as musicians, my musicians in the studio, we managed to get into those songs, because I work with some beautiful musicians and they really care about the music, and you can hear it in those songs. It's when the bigger songs are more about energy and sort of vibe, but those ones you can really hear the kind of the love for music and the putting music first. As I say, the best musicians put music first. And that's something you have to learn, and being part of something bigger, like we all contribute, and then there's this little magic pot where the music just succeeds over the top of us and becomes bigger. You're in the moment then, where everybody's part of that song contributes to something bigger. Yeah. And there's this kind of movement. And of course the way I record them, I record a lot of these things to tape and live, which is another little secret. People have forgotten to do that these days. People like to like recording set bits. And for a long time, doing the live recordings to tape adds that drama, because there's a nervousness amongst the musicians and a focus and a concentration where you can't just keep recording. If you're using tape, you've only got 20 minutes of tape. So you've got to get a take where you all agree on at the end of it, is that the one? Or do we wipe the tape and do another take? And so it adds a focus and an element to the music that adds a real magic touch, that I think, doing stuff to tape. Not just the sound of it, just the process means you have to do it in the moment. You can't just say, that will do, and I'll chop it up, move it around, or overdub. You have to get it right. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that emotion of recording that comes out in those records. So you hear in those ballads especially, I think, because in a ballad there's nowhere to hide. You're playing a real deep track like that. You've only got to play one kind of wrong note, and it's just like, and it's heartbreaking to get it to be the one who gets it wrong. Yeah. But that's all part of the process of striving to come out with something that's brilliant, that you're trying to not just like make a record, make a brilliant record, make great, something that will last forever, that means something, that has some emotion in it, and that means something to somebody somewhere, because music it's all like the soundtrack to our life, isn't it? There's certain pieces of music that remind us of certain eras and take us back, and that's the power I'm always trying to tap into, that kind of connection, and obviously it's instrumental music mostly, so it's really hard to connect unless you've got a good melody or even a good title like Winter. When I listen to that song, it does sound like winter to me. The title's very simple and the song fits it. It's got that kind of melancholy sort of winter sound to it, that reflective sound of winter when we all reflect a lot more, you know. It's not the kind of the hustle and bustle of summer, you know.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and insights. And on the next episode, we're gonna get deep dive into your new album,
Right.
The Eternal Now.
Gondwana Records podcast.
Coming up next in episode 20, we continue our conversation with Chip Wickham. We'll dive deeper into the inspiration behind The Eternal Now and the process and stories that shaped his new sound. See you on the other side.